So we're receiving the higher energy from the sunspot groups that were just facing the Earth. And if there had been a coronal hole on the other side, the energy that melted off the clouds here in Northern California, or should I say is hypersymmetric with the movement of the clouds, giving us this nice blue sky, we would have had a disturbance beneath the ground from the coronal hole that wasn't present. So there wasn't a coronal hole surrounding these active regions that produce the wind and water vapor materialization and dematerialization in the atmosphere. The energy inconsistencies that produce these various phenomenon are non-local. They come from the hypersymmetric resonation with our nearest star in its time-space emanations as our mover, our unmoved mover that moves us through time. In a lot of ways, the work that I'm doing is a defense of the Aristotelian, the aristocratic worldviews. And in the case that there had been a coronal hole, this is probably the last place on Earth most people would want to be if there was an earthquake here in California. This piece of rock is perched precariously over a cliff, a very steep, sharp cliff. And it really has nothing supporting it. There's really not any support for it. And so if there was a serious quake, this rock might end up like the rubble below. You can see some of the pieces down there in the valley from this cliff having fallen in the past. And so there is a sort of inertia that this rock has through time-space. But being a rock, these sorts of movements are very, very slow in its lifespan, in its life cycle. And if you understand the HD model in astrophotometry, you could understand possibly how someone who was acting as a sort of wave guide, as a sort of antenna for these sorts of energies, might be able to sort through the forms as they arrived, using a place like this as a way to predicate the possible outcomes. It's sort of dangerous work. There's all sorts of mythologies about volcanoes and throwing the virgins into the volcanoes and various sorts of things like that, that actually have a sort of factual basis with another form of understanding of the actual nature of our universe, of the world. When you understand that the spherical form that we model the Earth as is a sort of illusion, and that the movement of this spherical form around the sun is also just this theoretical model that has been developed that is only a rough approximation of a more complex and beautiful reality. Then sorting out these sorts of particularities becomes the next step, the next movement in the development of a better worldview. The War On, Part 15, brought to you from the Armstrong Woods Nature Preserve, where I was called to do this sort of work here, to learn about this, to interact with these energies, and engage the reality, the more subtle reality. And this is an aspect of my work that I have previously not shared, because there's simply no scientific way to keep people from just simply labeling me crazy and writing me off and preventing me from doing my work, to sabotage me, to spy on me. And that's very sad, because these people are ignorant and they don't know what they're doing, and they're being puppeted by people who have a better idea of what they're doing, that don't have our interests in mind, that don't have reality's interests, that aren't interested in what's true, that aren't interested in what's real, but who are interested in their own agendas, in their own power grab, in their own version, their false version of reality, and enforcing what they believe should be the physical laws, rather than respecting what is the law of nature, the law of God. Many of these people would have you believe there's no such thing as God. Some of these people are atheists, or they're convinced that anybody that has religious notions is crazy. And so they're working very hard to enforce their worldview, especially here on YouTube. And I consider these people very, very dangerous, considering the fact that they don't even respect the scientific methods that they claim as their own. As I've said before, if Sir Isaac Newton had seen the double slit experiment, if Sir Isaac Newton had understood the relationship between light and the observation of light as its relative parts are sorted out, if he had seen the photon spin entanglement, if he had seen the observations that I've made with astrophotometry, the correlation between the coronal hole and the earthquake, the correlation between the active region and the incoming sun-grazing comet, the correlation between the coronal mass ejection and the tropical cyclone, if he had seen those things, if he had known about those things, I doubt that he would have called his laws of motion laws of motion. I think he mistranslated the Emerald Tablet. I think that Newton's translation of the Emerald Tablet is flawed, possibly because he didn't know what he was translating. If you already understand a principle, if you already understand a concept before you read somebody's version of it, it's more likely that you'll get it. Had he already understood the concept of the Hermetic seal in the form of as above, so below, if he'd understood the nature between the heavens and the earth, I don't think he would have tried to apply his gravitational theories to the celestial spheres. I think he would have seen that that would be a sort of misnomer. I might be wrong about this. I haven't studied Newton's work in detail, but I do know that the people who taught me Newtonian mechanics didn't know this. And that I believe that Newton would have been very, very angry at the way his work was being used. And in a sense, here in the United States, these things are taught because it's a requirement for believing that it's possible that people could go to the moon. Science is being taught for political reasons. It's a political science, not a natural science, not a science of God, not a science of reality. And so there's a great number of people in this culture that are going to pay the price for this lie, for this deception, one way or another.